1994. A hunter on the outskirts of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, sees something in the brush that gets his attention.
He just was wandering into the bush there, and he came across human remains. Of course, he called the police right away.
It was all a great mystery, and it became an even bigger mystery when 2 more bodies were found.
It soon becomes clear it is the work of a serial killer.
This doesn't happen every day in Canada. It certainly doesn't happen every day in Saskatoon.
Along with police, there are those who chronicle the investigation up close, on film, on paper, and on tape. They are the public's first witness. Through their lens, they capture our darkest chapters of crime. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, a small city of 200,000 people, sometimes called Paris of the Prairies by its proud residents. But in 1992, it was also a city divided.
I describe Saskatoon as being a very deceptive place. It's a beautiful city, a lovely river running through the middle of it. But on the other side, that's pretty much the urban area where the Aboriginal people have sort of gravitated to because of cheap housing and this kind of thing.
That is the Skid Row area. It's a very depressed area, and it's as a result all the things that come with poverty, and that's crime and that's prostitution. It's a tough part of town.
Saskatoon's downtown is notorious for the prostitutes and hustlers who ply their trade. It is also the site of bars and arcades that draw young people. One of them is 15-year-old Shelley Napope.
She's very free-spirited, I guess. She wasn't shy. If she was gonna tell you something, she was blunt, and she wasn't scared of anything. She was very fearless.
Shelley Napope hasn't always spent her time on the streets. She had a happy childhood. She especially loved playing big sister to her little brother Huey. As Shelley grows up, she begins to resist authority and is drawn to the city's nightlife and begins running away from home.
It was really unfortunate because Shelley was a good kid, and I've heard comments from teachers who loved having Shelley in their classroom, and Shelley had friends who just adored her.
Shelley is placed in foster care, but she hates living with strangers and continues to run away for days or weeks at a time.
And she started to change. She was becoming a street kid. She met some friends at the bus terminal and started hanging around with her friends at some arcade.
She was just a little girl who came to the city. She wasn't going anywhere, really. So, she would be easy prey for someone to pick up in a bar and, give with some kind of promise of some sort of stability.
By the summer of 1992, Shelley is tiring of street life. She dreams of being a social worker or a police officer and wants to go back to school, but she still depends on her friends on the street. On a hot summer night outside her favorite bar, Shelley accepts a ride from a man she has seen many times before.
We know that she got into a car behind the Albany Hotel, and the idea was to get a ride to visit a friend, and because there was beer in the car and Shelley was ready for a good time and very carefree, took a lot of chances. At that time, she quite willingly went along for the ride.
As weeks go by, Shelley is nowhere to be seen. Even though she spends a lot of time on the streets, she has stayed in contact with her parents. But as the weeks turn into months, her family becomes very concerned.
She never missed a birthday or a holiday. You know, she always wrote home, happy birthday. When the letters and everything stopped, the time in between there just got longer and longer, and the urgency to find her got more alarming.
Shelley's parents report her missing to the police, and they open a file and begin canvassing the area. Her parents as well begin a search of their own, driving up and down the streets of Saskatoon.
They couldn't do very much. They didn't have tons of money and a big vehicle to go looking and searching everywhere. But with the vehicle that they did have, they managed to cover some areas of Saskatoon looking for her.
The family remains hopeful and believes it will just take more time for Shelley to call home. August 1992. 30-year-old Eva Taysup is getting ready for a night on the town.
Eva Taysup was in many ways two different people. She was a very caring mother. Her children were very important to her. But there were times when she fell off the rails a bit, and she liked the bars.
She has 4 children she loves, but her relationship with their father has ended. The pressure of being a single mother has been too much, and the children go to live with relatives.
She was like under a lot of stress and like frustrated. Unfortunately, the kids were no longer in her care. So therefore, I mean, like, she was pretty much like on her own and just decided to do what she wanted.
Popular in the downtown party scene, Eva begins spending much of her time in bars.
She loved to dance, and she loved to listen to music. She's like a really outgoing person, really kind-hearted, generous, and I think sometimes maybe just too trusting.
The bar scene soon wears thin, and on a summer night in 1992, she calls her parents on the Yellow Quill Reservation.
She wanted my parents to pick her up from Saskatoon, and she was crying on the phone. She wanted to get the children back and look after them.
She had hopes for a better life, and she had talked to her sister, Bev, about, quitting drinking, no more parties. She wanted to go back to school. She wanted to improve her life.
Her parents promise to come for her in a few days, as it will take some time to arrange the trip. August 1992. Eva Taysup is approached by a man in the bar she has seen many times before. They talk for a while, and as they leave, she accepts a ride from him and gets into his car. 3 days later, Eva's parents arrive in Saskatoon, but Eva is not at the designated spot. Her family is worried and concerned. Knowing how much she wanted to come home, they take their concerns to the police.
They came to Saskatoon and looked, and then they had also filed a missing persons report.
The police take the information, and as in Shelley Napope's case, they open a file. But they are cautious about how best to proceed.
And sometimes these women are running from abusive relationships and they don't want to be found. So the police and the public are often very slow to respond.
The families had, I think without exception, reported each of them missing numerous occasions. In one of the instances, one of the girls had been reported missing to police 38 times. So it was common that they were absent from their normal lives for long periods of time. This was an impediment to the investigation.
But the Taysup family has a gut feeling that this time things are far from normal.
I wasn't verbal about my fears to anyone because, I mean, like, if I say what I feel, that maybe something is wrong, then I was so scared that if I say it, then it might be true.
September 1992. 22-year-old Kalinda Waterhen is also a popular face in the downtown bars.
She was a very restless person, and she wasn't really prepared to stay at home on the reserve.
Her father, Steve Morningchild, keeps in close contact with his daughter. Despite living several hundred kilometers apart, letters or cards on holidays and special occasions are expected and never missed. On a September evening in 1992, Kalinda is waiting outside her favorite bar for her friends to come and join her. Before nightfall, a car pulls alongside the curb, and like Shelley Napope and Eva Taysup, Kalinda Waterhen gets into the car, and it speeds off. It is the last time she is seen. By the spring of 1993, Steve Morningchild is very concerned about his daughter. She is not called for nearly 6 months, nor has he received any letters or communication from her.
There were 2 family funerals that Kalinda didn't show up for, and these were relatives who were very close to her. And the feeling was, something's happened because Kalinda hasn't come back for these events.
Morningchild immediately goes to the police and files a report. Within days, the police find record of Kalinda's health card, but because she is an adult, they are forbidden by law to tell her father where she is.
At that point, Steve Morningchild was quite concerned that something had happened to his daughter.
3 young women from very similar backgrounds have disappeared. The police have the missing persons reports on record, but given the transient lifestyle these women lived, they have few leads, and the cases run cold. July 1993. Nearly a year has passed since the disappearance of the 3 young women. RCMP Constable Malcolm Eskilson is in the office when the phone rings. It's a small-time crook by the name of Bill Corrigan.
Bill Corrigan was a career loser. He was a small-time thief and con man. He had spent 20 years of his life in jail.
Eskilson meets with Corrigan to question him about the tip. Corrigan tells him that the body of a girl named Angie is located in a heavily wooded area south of Saskatoon. He gives specific directions to the site.
The police did go down to the area. They searched. They had a search dog, and they spent a few hours perhaps down there.
Among the team of detectives searching through the woods is RCMP Constable L. Keller.
I was out there, and we walked the area looking for any clues that might pop up that might lead us to some human remains. We found nothing.
Corrigan is questioned again, but this time he tells RCMP that someone named John Potter has bragged about murdering a young girl and insists the body is at the site. Corrigan's information has been correct in the past, and with no trace of a body, Keller begins a search for John Potter. A team of RCMP officers scour the criminal database and pull records from the last 10 years. They soon conclude that John Potter doesn't exist.
So it was difficult to discern if we actually had something to investigate or not.
One year later, a hunter makes a grisly discovery while wandering through the woods, less than 50 meters from the site where police had searched previously. The police immediately descend on the scene, combing the area for evidence. They find much more than they bargained for. October 1st, 1994. A hunter stumbles on a set of human remains in a densely wooded area just south of Saskatoon. He calls the RCMP, and Constable Terry Sterling is quickly dispatched to the scene. Within minutes of arriving, he is staring at a set of human bones. After photographing and videotaping the site, he contacts forensic expert Dr. Ernie Walker.
And he came out and told us that this was not a historical set of remains, but that was very recently deceased remains. So Ernie Walker went with a team of our investigators from the RCMP, and they began excavating the area.
But searching the site is extremely challenging.
See, it's just knotted bush and really scrubby brush, so it's hard to see anything.
The team spends a week going through the bush looking for clues as to how the body arrived there. But after searching a 520 square meter area, they have no physical evidence. They are just about to leave when one of the officers makes a stunning discovery.
He was about 30 or maybe 40 meters from where the first set of remains were found. Noticed something white on the ground. Got a little closer and very quickly realized it was a human skull.
At that point in time, we realized we had a multiple deceased crime area, and a search team out of Regina was brought down that searched every inch of the area.
The media has also arrived at the scene, but the police set up a line to keep the cameras far away, a frustrating situation for newspaper reporter Warren Golding.
But through the whole process of investigating the crime scene, the media were kept quite a distance from the site, and the media certainly didn't get close enough to see very much at all.
Officers position themselves 3 meters apart and search the area. It is a tedious process, but as they move through the brush, they come upon another horrifying sight. A third body, wrapped in a blanket and tied with orange electrical cord.
When the first body was found, there wasn't a great deal of alarm or a great deal of interest. Things changed dramatically when 2 more sets of remains were found within 2 weeks.
And then it became clear this was a serial killing. When there's a killer on the loose, everybody wonders about where he's going to strike next.
The news of 3 bodies makes for sensational copy. The media files daily reports about the crime scene, but the RCMP is careful not to reveal everything found at the site. Some details, known as holdback evidence, are kept from the media and the public. Unpublished information is something only the killer could know.
That we utilized as holdback evidence so that we could in fact determine the validity of any further information that came in comparing them with what we could actually say of the scene.
They choose to keep the details about the blanket and electrical cord a secret. For Keller, the discoveries have triggered a memory of searching the same area the previous year. Could these bodies be related to Bill Corrigan's story about the murder of a girl named Angie?
He had given us a story which did not make sense, but clearly he knew something, as we found a body just where he said there was going to be a body.
Keller knows he has to question Corrigan again. Corrigan has moved to Winnipeg, and Keller is assigned the task of finding him. But that's the last thing they want the media or public to know.
As far as the media and the public knew, there was no investigation in terms of identifying a suspect. The police maintained that they had no idea what was going on. They had no suspect. It was too early in the investigation.
Meanwhile, at the University of Saskatchewan, Dr. Ernie Walker is in the process of identifying the remains.
Dr. Walker can tell, sometimes within months, how long a body has been on the ground simply by examining the remains.
By looking at features such as the size of hip bones and distance between the eyes, Walker determines the sex and the race of the victims.
He determined that they were all female, he determined that they were all native in origin through, I believe, the teeth.
The media finally has something concrete to report. The news shocks the city of Saskatoon.
Every day there was a new bit of evidence coming out, and that was partly by design, partly by our design, partly by the media's design.
The Aboriginal community is especially concerned.
When the first one was found, I was so afraid that she would be one of them.
I was constantly watching the news and always wanting to be what was going to happen next, what was going to be unfold like. And I never, in 100 years, would have thought it would have been Shelley.
There is still no sense of what the victims looked like. To get an impression, Dr. Walker consults with forensic artist Cyril Chan.
He moved on to eliciting the support of an artist who, in taking measurements of the skull, made 3 portrayals of these women.
Chan reconstructs the facial features of the victims, and the media immediately publishes them. With sketches, the victims take on a very human significance for the public.
They were able to get the word out, and then people said, well, that's so-and-so, or that looks like so-and-so.
The sketches cause very different reactions among the families of the missing women.
No, I would never think that was Shelley. I thought the poor family, whoever that is, like they have a family out there.
She was missing for a long time already. I knew that she was dead.
3 months after the discoveries, the victims' identities are determined conclusively. The remains are indeed those of Shelley Napope, Kalinda Waterhen, and Eva Taysup, who all disappeared in the summer of 1992. The RCMP arrive at Steve Morningchild's home to tell him his daughter Kalinda is dead. As soon as they arrive, he knows why they are there. It is the same at the home of Shelley Napope's parents.
They were living just off the highway, and the police went to knock on the door. They had Shelley's dental records, and it proved that she was one of the girls, and they just lost it.
October 15th, 1994. RCMP visit the informant, Bill Corrigan, the ex-con who led police to the same spot 1 year earlier.
I was assigned to go find Bill Corrigan, and we believed he was in Winnipeg at this time, and clear up the inconsistencies in his story.
Keller's suspicions are confirmed as soon as he arrives.
First words out of Bill Corrigan's mouth were, "They've found Shelley." And that's when Keller knew that Corrigan had another story to tell.
It won't take long for Corrigan to come clean with the whole story. October 1994. For weeks, the media has been reporting on the gruesome discoveries just south of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. The remains of 3 Aboriginal women, all victims of a brutal murder. Daily news reports advance the story as lurid details of the crime trickle out. 1 year earlier, an informant by the name of Bill Corrigan told police a man named John Potter was the murderer, but police don't think Potter exists. By now, Corrigan is living in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and RCMP Constable L. Keller is anxious to talk to him about inconsistencies in his story.
And we found him, and we interviewed him. In light of what we knew, he told us a different story.
Keller continues to press Corrigan for details. Expertly observing his mannerisms, Keller slowly retrieves the true story.
By that point, Bill was a lot more forthcoming and admitted that John Potter didn't exist.
And he told us that he had been out there and had actually witnessed John Martin Crawford kill a girl.
John Martin Crawford is a familiar name to the police. He has already spent 10 years in jail on a manslaughter conviction for the brutal killing of Mary Jane Sirloin, a young Aboriginal girl found with severe bite marks on her breasts that matched Crawford's dental records.
He was a bully. He got into trouble very, very early in his teens. Just a whole series of misadventures that sort of set him up for what he became, which was a very violent man with no conscience.
It was in the Prince Albert Penitentiary where Corrigan met Crawford, who was serving his term for the killing of Mary Jane Sirloin.
I think Bill Corrigan, in a way, looked up to John Crawford. I mean, John Crawford was a guy who was doing the end of a manslaughter sentence when Bill Corrigan met him. And in the pecking order in prison, John Crawford was somebody that Bill Corrigan wasn't. As things turned out, they became very close friends on the outside. And I think Bill Corrigan was afraid of John Crawford. Afraid that someday John Crawford might turn on him. And I think his turning to the police to rat out John Crawford had a little bit to do with, or maybe a lot to do with, personal survival.
While interrogating Corrigan, he tells them the story they have been waiting to hear. He outlines how he and Crawford picked up Shelley Napope and drove her out of Saskatoon, never to be seen again.
I heard some screaming. I turned around, and that's when I saw John Crawford with his fist going up and down.
He was there. He witnessed the event. He witnessed John Martin Crawford rape her and then strangle her and then stab her. And his involvement carried on beyond that. He had actually helped John Martin Crawford conceal the body.
Based on Corrigan's story, John Martin Crawford becomes the prime suspect. According to suspicion, Keller discovers that Crawford was charged but never convicted in the 1992 rape of another Aboriginal woman. She was later found dead. Police also know Crawford has had a bad reputation downtown.
There's a group called EGADS, which is a outreach program, and they travel around and give out sandwiches and condoms to the girls on the streets. And they had what they called a bad trick list, and this was a list of guys who were known to be violent. Crawford was on their bad trick list, and they knew about this guy.
Police decide to place Crawford under constant surveillance.
During the day, he was in the home, and in the early evening, he would get into his mother's car and start cruising Saskatoon till the very late hours and try to elicit the services of Aboriginal women. That's all he did. That's all he did in his life.
Although there is evidence to suggest Crawford is the killer, it is not enough to guarantee a conviction. Police know they need a confession from Crawford, and they believe that Corrigan can get it.
As things progressed, he became more than an informant. He became an agent for the RCMP.
Clearly, the only thing we had to identify the perpetrator was Bill Corrigan. There wasn't any question about whether or not we would use him. We had to use him. He was the only game in town.
In consultation with our behavioral science people, we developed a plan, an operation that we hoped would get the necessary evidence in order to convict Crawford.
The police devise an elaborate sting operation involving electronic wiretapping. They plan to place a recording device on Bill Corrigan and have him trigger a confession from Crawford. Wiretapping is an extreme measure that requires a court order, and the police are careful to take the proper steps.
If evidence is obtained by the technique and sought to be introduced in court, these things are attacked very vigorously by the defense lawyers. So you want to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's crossed.
Keller coaches Corrigan on what to say to get Crawford talking about the murders, and they've set him up in a downtown hotel, which the police have specially prepared.
We set him up in a room, in a hotel room, that was wired for audio. We had Mr. Corrigan wired with a body pad all the time.
With everything in place, it is time to set the trap. Corrigan calls Crawford and tells him he is in town for a few days. He suggests they meet, and Crawford readily agrees. The sting is off to a good start, with police watching the two men at close range.
For a number of days, they drove around the streets of Saskatoon, cruising the red light district, looking for girls, looking for prostitutes, looking for a good time.
Really, a night didn't go by when John Crawford didn't go out looking for women. And he would spend 2 or 3 hours every night. He would do a tour that started within a block of his house, and he would cruise about a 10-block area, and he would just go around and around.
As the electronic surveillance enters its third day, the police have listened to a lot of talk, but so far, Crawford has not told Corrigan anything about the murders.
And they would make comments about people they saw, places they recalled from the glory days, and they would talk about girls that they had picked up, and it was a very, very crude conversations, but very, a real eye-opener to the life of this guy.
The police still don't have the evidence they need. Crawford hasn't hinted to his involvement in the murders, and Corrigan hasn't even brought up the topic. But police have devised a plan they hope will confirm their suspicions. In an unprecedented collaboration, Keller is working closely with one of the local TV stations. The station has agreed to air a specially timed report.
We worked in conjunction with the TV station to air this news at 6 o'clock while they were sitting in front of the TV.
Corrigan is instructed to watch the newscast with Crawford. As he watches the reports, Crawford begins implicating himself in the crimes.
He talked about how, in one case, he realized she was dead, and his reaction was, there goes another one.
He told the manner in which he killed him, how he killed him, choked him, stabbed him. He talked about dismembering and how he didn't really have a taste for it. He tried to dismember one girl and only got through one limb. And in his words, if I remember correctly, he said it was gross.
Still, the police know the confessions could simply be ravings designed to impress Corrigan, confessions that could be refuted in court. But then, John Martin Crawford says something the police have been waiting for, the one sentence that proves that he is the killer. January 1995. A Saskatoon television station, in conjunction with the RCMP, airs a specially planned newscast. As hoped, suspected killer John Martin Crawford begins discussing the murder of 3 Aboriginal women with Bill Corrigan. Unbeknownst to him, the police are recording the whole conversation.
They're asking anyone with information about water hens or the killer to contact police.
I know. Yeah, I know you know, bugger.
John Martin Crawford made disclosures. I remember that girl. I put her in the ground. And they were totally unsolicited. And that's fantastic evidence. It just doesn't get any better than that.
But as fantastic and damning as Crawford's statements may seem, they can still be refuted as false bravado in court. However, it isn't long before Crawford finally says the words that prove that he's the killer.
The only one that I'm worried about is the one that was buried with 2 blankets.
covered her up, and then covered up again and put a cord around her.
In all the hours and hours of recording, it came down to one critical line, and that was the line about wrapping one body in an electrical cord. And in just one line, Crawford referred to that, because the police had not released that information to the media, that only the perp could know as the critical holdback evidence. That was all I needed.
Finally, after weeks of surveillance and 3 intense days of wiretapping, police have all the evidence they need to arrest John Martin Crawford. At 6 p.m. on January 17th, police close in and surround Crawford's car as he stops for a red light. With nowhere to run, Crawford is easily apprehended and placed under arrest.
I can still see very clearly in my mind the look on his face when he was arrested. I thought there would be some objection. I thought there would be some fear, but there was nothing. All he had to say to me was he wondered what we were having for supper at the jail, which in my mind shows the total callous, the lack of conscience. He was a mindless killer, and that's all he was.
Back at the detachment, RCMP begin questioning Crawford. Constable L. Keller leads the interrogation. With the photos of the 3 dead women on the table in front of John Crawford, it isn't long before Keller retrieves the whole story.
He held fast for a short period of time and then suddenly blurted out, "Yes, I killed this one, that one, and this one," pointing to photographs which I had displayed on the table. He didn't have any problem disclosing this information. He admitted to killing Shirley Napo, Eva Taysip, and Kalinda Waterhand. That left no doubt in my mind. When he come to understand, I believe, that all the conversations he had had with Bill Corrigan had been taped, I think at that point in time he realized that the gig was up, so to speak.
He tells the police in detail what had happened to each of the girls, starting with Shelley Napope. With Bill Corrigan in the car, Crawford drove Shelley to a secluded wooded area south of Saskatoon. After drinking several beers, Crawford told Corrigan to go for a walk. Then, he forced himself on Shelley. Crawford pushed her into the back seat while Shelley resisted. Soon, Corrigan heard Crawford shouting at Shelley, enraged that she has rejected his advances. He hits her over and over. Corrigan watched as Shelley ran screaming from the car. Crawford chased after Shelley and then brutally attacked her. She fell to the ground, silent. Curious, Corrigan moved in closer and Crawford standing over her lifeless body, a knife in his hand. Without emotion, Crawford said, "She's dead. Help me cover her up." As the disclosures progress, the police get further and further into the mind of a killer.
But the only explanation John gave for killing anybody was that they made me mad. And sometimes it was a very, very simple thing.
He told us that these girls were problems. He felt that had he not killed them, that he would have had to face consequences with the law for rape, for assault, crimes of that nature. He didn't have a grudge against any one of these girls. He didn't hate them or dislike them. These were simply problems to be dealt with. And his solution was to kill them, was to silence them. He was unconcerned for what he had done. He was not concerned for what was about to happen to him, that he would be facing possibly 3 trials and that he might be locked up for the rest of his life.
When the arrest is made public, there is a feeling of relief in the community.
I remember seeing pictures of him and thinking what a loser he was. That this guy should go around and kill all those people without remorse.
I was so drained from emotion. There was no certain way that I felt, you know. There were so many emotions inside me. I was angry, you know, I missed my sister. I had all of that going on.
There was a sense of relief, but then a lot of anger because no one has the right to take another person's life.
As the newspaper articles reveal more about John Martin Crawford, the anger escalates as questions start to be answered.
He felt that the Aboriginal community was weak, and this was something he could take advantage of. He felt that all white women that might be on the street were undercover police officers, and he was worried about that.
The police have all the evidence to convict Crawford in place. A witness, a taped conversation, and an outright confession. But the key witness for the prosecution is a known criminal and con man. His credibility is destined to be questioned by the defense. And if they're successful, John Martin Crawford could walk the streets again. May 1996. The trial of John Martin Crawford commences at a Saskatoon courthouse. Crown Attorney Terry Hines lays out the evidence to establish Crawford's guilt in the 1992 slayings of 3 Aboriginal women. However, the defense is quick to point out the culpability of witness Bill Corrigan, a convicted felon and known con man.
There is no dispute that it was his knife. And there's also no dispute that under oath, he has told a variety of stories about how that knife allegedly got in my client's hands.
Certainly I can understand where there would be suspicion, but suspicion isn't evidence. And that's where we are with Mr. Corrigan.
They wanted the jury and everyone else to believe that he had a larger part in this than he really did, but we know and we're very confident he did not.
The prosecution plays the tapes from the wiretap operation for the court. Crawford's admissions appall the jury and shock the families.
It was really quite hard to go there on a daily basis and to see the person that took my sister. And as hard as it was, I mean, I needed to know what had happened to her.
When they got to what happened to her, they released those tapes in the courtroom, and I can hear Crawford, and Crawford says, "I thought her name was Angie. I should have kicked her teeth out when I had the chance." And I looked at him and, you know, how do you look at into the eyes of a killer?
After just a few hours, the jury has its verdict: guilty. Crawford is convicted on 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder.
It was a great feeling, you know. In not many cases with First Nations, you know, you don't get that. And fortunately, Shelley got justice.
No matter the verdict, it will never bring back the 3 young victims who died at the hands of a madman.
I've kept in touch with 2 of the families, and I know it has affected them greatly. Eva left young children behind. The family of Shelley Napope, I know they're continuing to visit the grave site.
I don't think one ever really gets over the loss. And there was actually a long time that I had felt such hatred. I mean, I've dealt with it, you know, and I've healed over the years. But, you know, still really quite hard sometimes.
Today, John Martin Crawford is behind bars where he remains in obscurity. He is eligible for parole after 25 years, but those touched by his actions hope he never gets the chance to hurt anyone ever again.
There are predators out there walking amongst us, and I pray that there's no more John Crawfords out there.
John Crawford most certainly would be dangerous if he was released at any point in his life. He's a man that has no conscience, no feelings. He's a very dangerous person.